I'd like to just welcome everyone tonight on behalf of the Coastal Rangery Community Church. And our presentation tonight is on, and it's going to be a great one too, on renting, buying, or building in Mexico. And I will introduce our presenter in a moment. But just to let you know that these seminars are put on by our Community Service Committee. And I'm going to have Norva come up and explain to you what we do is we offer this free of charge, but we do have a free will offering basket if you would like to put something in the basket, and Norva will tell you where that goes to. And what we do is we give 50% of it to the presenter, and also 50% of it to our community service committee. And Norva will tell you what that committee does.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Yes, as Al said, that this talk is free to everyone with a donation requested if you'd like. And we collect all the money, and half does go to the speaker and half goes to the committee, and we disperse that in 3 directions it goes. The dispensas, and here's an example of one. It holds oil and toilet paper and flour and sugar and rice beans and some other miscellaneous things, and we give those to needy families in the neighboring communities. And we also give financial assistance to 3 high school students as they're making their way through their 3 years, and that's through Becca's Obara. You may have heard of that. And then thirdly, we give financial assistance to 2 students at the CAM school, and that stands for Centro de Atención Múltiple. It's special needs students, and we are supporting 2 students there. One additional item, as you are planning to go back to the north, you feel like going back to the north, keep in mind that if you want to leave behind any prescriptions, medical supplies, there is always a box at the welcome table for church on Sunday or for Thursday nights, and you can drop those items in there. And we do appreciate your generous support.
Thank you.
One other thing I would add to that is if you have any clothing you would like to drop off too, there's quite a few places where we're able to help out with clothing in this area, and so don't worry about packing your suitcase, just bring it here and we'll make sure it gets put to good use. At this time, I'd like to introduce our presenter tonight. Her name is Tracye Ross, and she lives in Barra. She's been here for 30 years. She deals in real estate. She has a construction company, and she helps people with rentals. And she also has a storage unit. I couldn't believe the work she's done. Does everybody get a handout? If you don't, just put your hand up and we'll make sure you get one. Good, okay. And Tracye's gone to a lot of effort to help us out with this printout, handout, and there'll be an opportunity to ask questions after she's done presenting this evening. Tracye?
Okay. Okay, is everybody here?
No.
Okay, everybody here now?
Better.
Actually, that mic is better, nice. No, the one that I said.
Okay, how's that? Excellent. Well, we have a really big crowd this evening. So hopefully we can answer some questions and give you some direction. We're going to try to run through this printout here somewhat quickly so that we have a lot of time for all the questions at the end. So we're going to start with real estate. And the first question is, should I be buying or should I just rent? And I do get a lot of people in the office. I had a gentleman last week, he came in and he wanted to buy or build. He was 80. So we had to talk about it. So if you follow your flow chart here over to rent, you'll see the first one is age. How much longer are you going to be coming? How long are you going to use and enjoy the house? And is that something that you should be renting or buying? What percent of the year are you going to use the house? I mean, are you going to be here 2 months? 4 months? What is the money outlay you're going to put in rent versus purchase? Then some people say, well, it's the availability of rentals. I can't find a rental. I had a great one and now they've sold the property and every year I have to move. So that is a consideration, but these are all the pros and cons. If you're renting, it's a liability. You spend that money, the money's gone. You've got no investment. But you also don't have insurance and taxes and maintenance and caretakers. And probably you don't have to spend 3 days on the telephone with Telmex trying to explain why you don't have internet. And those are some of the things that people come to me and they say, well, it's just really hard. I can't get a hold of the electric company. Telmex won't answer. I've called 4 times. They've never come out. So it's just getting some of those services. Right, I called the plumber, I waited for 4 hours, and I went out to dinner, and then he came. So it's the inconvenience of it all. But if we move over to buying, if we decided that we're not renting, we're going to purchase, then we have 2 types of property title. We have the ejido property, and we have the federally issued property deed. We're going to start with the ejido title. I will preface this by saying that in my company at Crazy Cactus, we do not sell or represent ejido property. Number one under ejido property is this is a bit of a leap of faith. You are going to need a presta nombre, which means that somebody's loaning you their name. But what it really means is you're putting it in their name and they are the owner. They own it. I had a friend, a guy I knew, and in the barrio in Barra, he went and he bought 2 lots and he was very happy. And he put them in his house cleaner's name. And she was a really, really sweet person. He loved her. And she was a great person. He left that year and went back to Canada. And her mother got very ill. And she was in the hospital. And this girl owned 2 lots. And her mother's in the hospital and she can't help her. She can't take care of her. So she sold one of the lots. She did. And she helped her mother. And that was the right thing to do. So he returns in the winter and figures out that one of the lots has been sold and he's very upset. It's the whole injustice of it all. But she owned those lots and he put her in that situation. How was she to choose between his property and her family? The situation of a presta nombre can extend past just your presta nombre. So he put it in the name of the cleaning lady and she was wonderful. Sometimes what happens if the cleaning lady passes away, because then she has heirs. She's got a husband or she's got some kids, and were they like-minded? Do they remember that this property was supposed to be yours? Or are they just in financial hardship and they need the money and they actually own it and they sell it. So there's a lot of situations that come into the Ejido property. It doesn't have a public registry where they record the deeds. So this is a bit of a leap of faith. If you move over to federal deed, that is a property deed that is issued by the federal government. It's recorded in the public registry, and it qualifies for the bank trust. Because we're in this area 31 miles from the coast, if you buy property, you have to put it in a bank trust. The bank trust is wonderful. You can improve upon it, you can rent it, and it has a clause in there where you can stipulate and leave it to your heirs. Bank trust generally costs somewhere around $500 to $600 US a year for the bank to service that trust. Even if you buy with your federal deed, your bank trust, ownership is secure, in this case you are going to have the cost of maintenance, insurance, taxes, repairs, caretakers. But it's your house. Every year you know you're going back to your house. Every year you know that you're going to have 6 plates, not 3. There's going to be more than 3 forks. And it's going to be in exactly the condition that you left it in. So there are bonuses. Your property with the federal deed, if you buy it, well, that's a financial asset, right? You're not paying rent. You own it. We always hope it goes up in value. And you can then sell it or leave it to your heirs. So we go down to the next column. And let's say that you're going to leave it to the kids. If you're going to do that, you need to make sure that you have all the required documents. Because the kids call me and they go, "What do I need?" And I go, "Well, you need the deed." "I don't know, this is in Spanish, what's it look like?" They have no idea. So we need to get the documents together, we need to label them, and the people need to know where they're going to be. On the left over here, there's a box called Documents Required, and that lists some of them. But you want to know that they have all the documents. If you leave it to the kids, then they're going to have to get a new deed in their name. So they will have to pay for the cost of the new deed. It's not automatic. It's not free. It'll take probably 3 months. They won't pay any capital gains when they inherit it. They will have to pay the capital gains when they sell it. But they will have the cost of the new deed, and depending on the value of the property, that could be significant. They'll have the bank fees. If they're going to keep the property, they need to pay the bank fees. And they'll have capital gains when they go to sell it. How much will they pay in capital gains? Well, their starting basis is whatever your starting basis is. I mean, they inherited it, they got a new deed, but their starting basis is still what you paid for the property. And we'll try to get into a little more about that in a minute. So we're going to sell it. The required documents are, you must have the original deed. And those things all look pretty similar. They always come running in, "Is this the one?" "No, that's not it." "Okay, I'll come back." "Is this the one?" Let's find out if you really have the original deed, and let's label it original deed. If you don't have it, depends on what happened. If you got a deed with Mr. Lonely from Siwatlan, he has since passed away. And so it's extremely difficult to get a deed. We can't get one out of that office at all. So we have to hire another attorney, and we have to get what they call a segundo testimonio, or second testament. It can be done, but it's going to cost, my notary likes to say 4 months and $300, but sometimes it takes a little longer. So you don't want to get ready to sell and then find out we got to wait 4 months because you don't have the original deed. If you purchased in 2015 or later, they now require that you have a CFDI. And a CFDI is an invoice or a factura, but it's a digital file. So no, it's not in that pile of papers, it's not one of those. And you need to go to the notary. And you need to get him to email you that digital file, and you need to save it on the computer, you need to back it up on a USB drive, but you need to have that digital file. If you get ready to sell and your notary's still alive and still practicing, we can probably go back to him and get that. In the case of Mr. Lonely, who's no longer with us, if you purchased 2015 or later, I've not encountered one person that ever got one of these electronic invoices. If you don't have it, your starting basis is zero. Zero. You need to be current on your property taxes and have your last property tax receipt. And you should have your bank trust payment receipts also. You'll need your current IDs. They're going to want a passport. They're going to want another form of photo ID, probably your driver's license. And of course, you must have your electric bill. Most important document in Mexico is the electric bill. Okay, so we're selling, we've got all our required documents, and now we're going to talk about the taxes. Let's start with exempt. In order to exempt, you need to be a permanent resident, because in essence you're going to claim this as your primary resident. So you have to be a permanent resident. You're going to need your CURP. It's just an identifier number, but it's very easy. We can go on the internet, get your CURP, print it out, no problem. You have to have an RFC, which is your tax ID number. That's a little harder. You know, you can go yourself or hire somebody. You need to make an appointment with SAT and Manzanillo and go down there and get your RFC. And at that time, they will print you out a piece of paper, and that's called your Constancia de Situación Fiscal, your fiscal situation paper. And you have to have that, and you have to print it. Some notaries, which are lawyers, interpret things differently. They interpret the law a little bit differently. I can go to some notaries and they'll say, if you have your RFC, your tax number, on that RFC it lists your address. And if that address is the house where you're currently living, they'll go, okay, fine, I don't care. They've got an RFC, and the RFC number is on their electric bill. We're golden. Other notaries that will say, no, that's not what the law says. The law says the address on your RFC has to be an address other than the house that you're selling. I know it makes absolutely no sense. What the government is saying is, You said you were a permanent resident. You said you're selling your house. So you must be going to buy or rent or live somewhere else. So we want to see an RFC with an address other than what you're selling. So if we go back to this notary in a year or two and we audit them, and we decide that you didn't pay the right amount of capital gains, we'll have some place to start looking for you. Well, how are you going to get an RFC with some other address? You may have to get a rental agreement with your landlord or your neighbor or somebody else. You just get a rental agreement, and then you can get that address on your RFC. As a permanent resident, you can exempt for roughly, approximately, varies a little bit, 5 million pesos for each owner. So if you own a house and you're the sole owner, and you meet all these requirements, it's 5 million pesos. If you own a house and your significant other, and there's 2 people on title, you each can get a 5 million peso exemption as long as you have all these other requirements. Your CURP, your RFC, you put your RFC on your electric bill, and when you do that, you need to tell the electric company, email me my electric bill every 2 months. Because in that email, there's 2 files. There's a PDF and an XML file. And the XML file is the one that just has dashes and O's and you can't read it. But that is the file every notary will require to prove your exemption. So you've got to have one of those. Okay, let's say we're going to pay. If you own a house, you're the sole owner, and you qualify and get your permanent resident exemption for 5 million pesos, but the house value is over and above that, then your rate on capital gains is about 25%. If you're a tourist or temporary resident, you're going to fall in the 30 to 35% tax range. So you could be permanent resident and you could exempt, but you leave it to the heirs, to the kids, and they're tourists, and now they're going to pay at the rate of 35%. The gain is the sales amount less whatever is stated on your deed in pesos. No, this is not what you paid. It's what's stated on your deed in pesos. So in 2007, you bought a house. And you bought this house for $100,000. The exchange rate to the US dollar in 2007 was 10 to 1. That means it was 1 million pesos. When they made the deed, whatever you paid or they say you paid, they converted that to a peso amount and put it in that deed. So 1 million pesos. Is everybody following this math? We paid $100,000. It was 10 to 1. The deed says we paid 1 million pesos. So we jump forward, and let's just use last year because the math's easier. The exchange rate was 20 to 1. How much is 1 million pesos at 20 to 1? 50,000. So now you say, well, I paid 100. We're back to the injustice of it all. But your starting basis is actually 50. There's other avenues to explore Some of them would be what we call chattels. You know, you can say, well, we're selling the house for $250,000, but $50,000 of that's going to be furniture, fixtures, artwork, and that can help reduce your basis. And other things that we can explore, but that's a little more in depth. If you purchased land and built a house, then you're going to need an appraisal of the improvements. Here again, it's going to greatly depend on what notary you're using. I can pick some in Manzanillo, and any authorized appraiser will do me, and he can make an appraisal of improvements. Some of the better English-speaking notaries out of Guadalajara, they're going to say, no, law didn't say that. And we're going to have an appraisal of improvements by a special appraiser. He's almost like an attorney and an appraiser, and they call him a corredor. Same idea, same process, just costs more money. And then there will be a difference between the sales amount and the appraisal, and that's how we'll get your starting basis for the calculation. I understand this has been kind of a lot of information, and we went through it pretty quickly, but we want to save time for questions. So, at Crazy Cactus, my business partner Jorge and myself would like to extend to you an invitation for a free consultation. The only thing we ask is, please make an appointment. And you need to bring your papers. We can't discuss it if we don't have papers. We're going to need the deed and the property taxes. And then if you need help or need assistance, we're happy to do that. There is no charge for it. Just please make an appointment. Another plug, Jorge, my business partner, is a licensed civil engineer, and he just got his master's in appraisal. And so very shortly, Crazy Cactus will be offering appraisal services. Whether you want an appraisal, just how much is it worth, or every time you sell a property, an appraisal is required. And so, just because the government wants to know what the appraiser said it was worth, generally that's going to be whatever you said you're selling it for. But you have to have an appraisal. Otherwise, the government thinks we would all lie in an effort to avoid paying our due taxes. So that's the basis of what I had. Do we want to start questions? Oh, we did really good. There's no questions.
All my papers say and or. Me and my late husband, he passed away. So I'm the only one there. I didn't change my fideicomiso. It's all and or, the electric, everything. Do I qualify for one or two people as far as the capital gains?
As far as the capital gains, you're only going to qualify for one, because I believe you said your late husband had passed away.
Yeah.
At that time, he would no longer qualify. I would recommend bringing your paperwork. If I can't answer it, we'll send it to Guillermo Gatt in Guadalajara and get him to clarify. It was very popular many years ago to do the and/or thing, and Loma Lee thought it was a good idea, and at the time it sounded great. Things change, and now they're not liking that and/or as well, so we need to consult him professionally and see if it'll fly, or if you're going to need to go ahead and make some changes.
Just put your hand hand up if you have a question, and I'll head over there right now.
Hi, Tracy, thank you. Our property is under ejido, and we do not have a Presta nombre. It is in our names, and we have our children as the beneficiaries on that property. Is that correct?
To the best of my knowledge, no. I can again try to help you. We don't represent that property, but we can try to help you. My notary has sent me the civil codes that actually say that no, that's not possible because foreigners can't own ejido property. So it's, sometimes in Mexico, unfortunately, you need to be careful what you ask for because they'll give it to you, even if it doesn't meet all the requirements. To my understanding, to the letter of the law, that's not possible.
Okay, we had a Presta nombre and we went ahead and changed that because our attorney said we could do it.
Like I say, the law is meant to be interpreted. That's why they have so many lawyers and they make so much money. We chose the wrong profession, but I do have a really good one in Guadalajara. Guillermo speaks perfect English. He's a law professor, so he's at the very top level. And I'd be happy to put you in contact with him, and he can give you some dead, spot-on answers.
Great, thank you.
And maybe, I have heard of some ejido groups that are doing that. According to what I understand, it's not legal. I know there are a lot of people that own ejido property. I don't know exactly what the answer is. There are a lot of foreigners now that are Mexican citizens. And maybe that's something that you might want to explore.
Okay, we have a question here.
Hi, Tracy. Thank you. I have a question about the bank trusts. When you buy a property and you set up your bank trust, they ask for who it will be left to. Beneficiary, sorry. And I think what you said a few minutes ago, is that it automatically transfers to that beneficiary within the bank trust, but then you have to pay a fee to actually change the title. Is that correct?
So what you have is you have a deed or a title, and that title is held in trust. If something happens and you have a beneficiary on the trust, it's easier in that you don't have to go through probate, but you're still going to have to contact the notary. He's still going to have to write a new deed. He's still going to have to get the bank's okay and approval and signature. And yeah, it's a new deed, so whatever a deed costs, right? $6,000, $8,000, $10,000.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
Right here is what
Hi, Tracy.
Hello.
Is there any advantage to being a citizen? As far as holding property, paying all the...
I think so, yes. I'm a Mexican citizen as well. So what are my advantages? Well, if you buy property as a permanent resident or tourist or temporary resident, you have to have a bank trust. I like the bank trust. But for me to do a closing, we're looking at 3 to 4 months. If I'm buying a property as a Mexican from another Mexican, it takes me 25 days. And I don't have to get the bank's approval, I don't have to pay for the trust, I don't have to advise foreign relations, it's very quick. But the rest of it's the same. I mean, I don't get any exemptions, capital gains wise, any more so than you would. On your capital gains exemptions, you can only take that exemption once every 3 years. So if you're gonna flip houses, you only get one exemption every 3 years. That answer? Kinda?
Yeah. But as far as the trust and turning it over to him,
As far as the trust and turning it over to family members or anything, is there any advantage in being a citizen?
Not that I've seen so far. I mean, the trust actually makes it clearer, because sometimes I can leave, on one of my deeds, I can leave a beneficiary, but they're real picky. It could be your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, or your kids. It's a real small pool from which to pick. And then sometimes they go too fast and forget to list the beneficiary, and then I've got to have a will, and then I'll probably have to do a probate. So it's not quite as clean as the trust, unless you're really, really watching it. And no, I can't think of really any benefits that way.
A Hedo land that, what's the difference between, in a Hedo land, a house on a lot compared to just a lot or just land? How are those treated separately?
As far as
Taxes, paperwork in terms of selling, if it's just a lot.
well, if it's a lot, in Hedo, I'm going to say I'm not sure, because some Hedos, they collect their property taxes. Some people pay property taxes to the Hedo and to Seawat Lawn, and the Hedo controls that. The Hedo's a local governing board of 8 or 12 guys, and they kind of get to make the rules. I don't know what they're going to charge you for capital gains, if that's the
That's what I was
question.
going to say, is there capital gains on just land?
Capital gains is on everything the government can collect on, okay? Exemption, you can only qualify for exemption if it's a house, because it's your primary residence. If it's just a vacant lot, there's no exemption, because you didn't pitch a tent and they're not going to believe it, right? So if you're buying and selling vacant land, you're going to pay taxes every time. You're not going to get an exemption, you're going to pay. If you have a house and you qualify for all the other items, then you can get an exemption.
Tracye, as a property owner, is it important to have a Mexican will?
If you have a bank trust and your beneficiaries are in that trust, then no, not necessarily. I mean, if you've got a bank account, you probably left a beneficiary on that, unless you're leaving a lot of other stuff. If it's just the house and they're on there and it's in a trust, then you're probably fine.
Any other questions? Please put your hand up.
Hi, Tracye.
Hello?
Can you own more than one property in the bank trust?
That's really messy. The short answer is yes, if they're touching. So if you own this lot and you buy the lot right next to it, then you can incorporate that lot into the same trust, normally at the discretion of the bank. And so people come in and they own this house, and then they buy the lot next door, and they're like, we've got to put it in the same trust. We're going to save $600 a year. And I go, are you sure? Because when you go to sell that lot, it's really messy. Nope, we're never going to sell it, I swear. It's not gonna happen. Okay, so we do that, and 2 years later they go, well, I think I'm gonna sell that lot. And it's really messy. Because the bank's made one trust, and then it just takes more time and more work to get the bank to separate that out. What happens is the person that buys it ends up paying for a whole new trust, and it costs them more money. Or you, it's all in the price, right? So I keep saying, if you're not going to sell it, that would be okay, but that never holds true.
Any more questions?
So, if I'm trying to figure out if I'm gonna sell my house, like what to ask for it, it's kind of, like the comps aren't real. I mean, how do I ask the real estate agents, or, just come up with a number in my head, or how does that work?
Well, I can't speak for all of them, but what we usually do is we'll go look at the property, and then we'll look at the paperwork. Because it doesn't do me any good to tell you that the house is worth $200,000, and then we get an offer and you go, well, so how much am I going to get out of that? And then we got to start all over with, are you going to owe capital gains? How much is it going to be? Out of the 200, what's the net to you? So we need to look at the paperwork, because you need to be prepared for, even if it sells for 200, what are you going to pay? And then we look at the house, we look at the age, the condition, the location, and the sellability. Like, there are some houses that have lots of little rooms and they're not open concept, or, what is the market generally looking for? Some houses are more sellable than others because of their design or floor plan. So we look at that, and in our case, it's usually George and myself that'll look at a house. So George is going to look at it from how many meters of construction do you have, what type of construction, what did it cost, what would the replacement cost be, what would the depreciation be, and he's going to come up with a number based on that criteria, what you actually have there. And then we're going to look at it and say, okay, realistically, based on the other stuff that we've got for sale or we've sold, what do we think this thing would actually sell for? There are no comps. In Mexico, every real estate deal is a private transaction. There is an agreement written in that transaction. That paperwork really is only between the buyer and the seller. It does not need to go to the notary. All the notary needs to know is, here's the deed, and here's who's buying, here's who's selling, here's the general information, and this is the price that we've agreed to. So there's no comps. It doesn't get recorded in CWAT line, right? You can't go look it up and find out what John sold the house for next door, unless it just gets out on the rumor mill. So that's how we go about it. I don't know exactly what to tell you. I've gone to some houses and the realtor went in and they wanted to get the listing, and so it was like, well, yeah, it's going to bring 580. And maybe a year or two go by and they go, well, it's not selling. And it's like, well, 580 is not the number. But sometimes they'll give you a little better number sometimes, because that's what you want to hear. And Steve Cotton had a whole speech about what we want to hear. And if not, I think he's coming back for the second round, just asking.
Yeah, there will be a part 2 for Steve Cotton's presentation. Any other questions? Put your hand up so I can see your question.
Hi,
Tracye. Thank you so much for your presentation. But I have a question related to ejido land. So from the point of buyer, so it's four category of people who could kind of purchase the land or land with a house on it. So it's Mexican citizen, it's permanent residents, it's temporary residents, and people with touristic visa. So because on this paper, you show that kind of presta numbering is mandatory, in fact, as far as I understood that. So, but is it correct, or could you please clarify this situation around ejido land?
Did you understand the question, Tracye?
I think so, let me try.
Can you repeat the question? Exactly what are you asking here? Just so clear.
Here on the paper, you put that person who's supposed to buy ejido land should have presta number. But if, for instance, it would be the citizen of Mexican state, is it correct?
Yes. As far as I know, what I've been told is that ejido property is for Mexican citizens. End of story. So to circumvent that, since only Mexicans are supposed to own ejido property, if a foreigner wants to own it, then they have to put it in a Mexican's name, and then we call that presta nombre. And presta nombre means he's loaning me his name. And that sounds a little nicer than it actually is, because I wrote here presta nombre, and out beside it I put owner, because he really owns it. So if you go out and you want a car, but you can't own a car, I'll be your presta nombre, just put it in my name. And so you put the car in my name. I own the car. So that's what it means. The lawyers, and some of the lawyers will write up additional paperwork in an effort to protect you. They'll sometimes give you a power of attorney, so you have power of attorney over your presta nombre. But what that means is that you can sell the property and sign for him. He doesn't need to be present. He's still the owner. He can still sell it, or whatever he needs to do with it. Sometimes the lawyers will write you up what they call a 99-year lease, right? So you have the right to live in this place for 99 years. I would just say be very careful, because really good paperwork in Mexico is just the beginning of a really good fight. And in Mexico we have a saying, más vale un mal arreglo que un buen pleito. And if you can translate that, it means it's better to have a bad agreement than a good fight. So if you're in an argument, you need to get together, and even though it's not what you want, neither side wins, you need to come to some agreement before you haul off to the lawyers and start paying for a really good fight. Because the wheels of justice here turn very slowly.
Did you get your answer? No? Okay.
My question was, for instance, you are.
For instance, you are, as far as I understood, you are also Mexican citizen.
Yes.
And if you are Mexican citizen, should you have another person as a presta nombre?
No.
To purchase ejido land?
No, if you're a Mexican citizen, I could go buy ejido property. I'm Mexican. I hold 2 passports, I can go buy it. But understand, other than just the presta nombre, the ejido property doesn't have a public registry. Okay, so I can't go to a public registry and track who was the previous owner. I had a friend in Milwaukee, and they purchased a lot from the Ejido. True story. They built a very nice house. They lived in it for several years. And one day a man shows up and he's got an Ejido title, or Ejido Constancia. And he says, well, this is my property. And they go, well, that can't be. I mean, I've got a title. Evidently, in those cases, the oldest title wins, and his was old. I mean, did somebody forget to get it back when they did the paperwork? I don't know. Like I say, there's not a property registry, so how those things are handled in those individual groups is a bit of a gray area. So there's many things that come into play with Ejido other than just the fact that there may be a Cresta Nombre.
Does a power of attorney over Ejido property sometimes expire? And if so, what protection has the gringo owner?
So a power of attorney now is good for 5 years. And at the end of the 5 years, it expires. If you had a power of attorney over your Cresta Nombre for the Ejido property, well, you could then use that power of attorney, and you could go sell it to this gentleman or put it in his name because he's a Mexican citizen. Or if you have a good friend that is a foreigner that's also a Mexican citizen, maybe you want to use someone like that. You can sell the property without him because you have his power of attorney. However, he is the owner, and he can also sell it any day.
What is the status of the gringo after the expiry date?
We'll call that goodwill.
What about properties purchased before 2015?
Properties purchased, the 2015 date applies to the CFDI, which is a digital file that you have to have that proves your purchase amount, and that only applies to federally deeded property. So if you've got a federally deeded property, escrituras, you have to have that because it's in the deed and you're going to pay capital gains tax or become exempt, whatever the case may be. On Ejido property, the capital gains, I can't answer that. I don't know how each Ejido would handle it.
Thank you.
What exactly is Ejido land?
What exactly is Ejido land?
Man, y'all are really beating me up with this Ejido land. We started this conversation by saying, as a general rule, I don't buy it and I don't sell it, but Ejido is a local governing group of men. There's a Bar Ejido, there's a San Patricio Ejido, there's a Milwaukee Ejido, there's an El Ranchito Ejido, and those guys govern that land. And they keep the records of who buys it and who sells it, and they collect the little taxes, and they have a board of directors, and they make the rules. Many times the Ejido, or the people that own Ejido property will say, okay, well, you know, this land would be a lot more valuable to me if I actually had a federal deed on it, because then these foreigners could buy it and life would be better. And so some of these people will then go to the Ejido and say, we want a federal deed. And they could go and start that process. It's, like most things, is usually lengthy. I don't know, 2 to 3 years maybe, just depends on how many people want it. They have to start the process, pay for it. They come down, they inspect it, they measure it, and then they send it off to Mexico City. And eventually, you pay for it and get a título de propiedad. Once you have that, now we can do a bank trust. So some people do convert their Ejido property to title property, but it's a process, and that's not something that we offer.
in San Patricio, there's only ejido. People cannot have a bank trust. That's what I've been told. Ejido is the only one there. The Obregon, we're okay, and people west Melake, they're okay, but in San Patricio, just ejido.
I don't know, I don't make that general statement because I've seen places where 4 houses were ejido and the next one had a title. So if there was a man that wanted it bad enough and was willing to pay for it and went to the ejido, he's going to have a title. So I wouldn't make a broad statement that none of them have it because just bring me the paperwork and we'll find out.
Any more questions? We have about 3 minutes to go, and we'll be wrapping this up. Put your hand up.
Are there any opportunities to establish a business entity, a Mexican business entity, to purchase land and therefore have the business entity owned by a foreign person?
That was a little vague. Yes, depends on what you're trying to do. You can establish a Mexican corporation, and it can be wholly owned by you. I don't even think you need a Mexican person. It could be a wholly foreign people owning this Mexican corporation.
Corporation buys the property.
And the corporation buys the property.
The corporation buys the property, but that has its own set of nuances, so we really have to look at what you were intending to do with it. That's really good if we're going to build a big condo complex, and we need to put it in there so when we sell it, we can break the pieces off and get the money to where it's supposed to go. Corporations require different bookkeeping, and you need an accountant, and you need a separate bank account, but yes, people do use them.
I'm not going to give legal advice because I can't.
Yeah.
But in answer to the corporation question,
Okay.
they can be set up, but you cannot use a residence on that property, on the corporation, to be a primary residence. It violates the corporation law.
Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
Saved by Steve.
Not advice.
Okay, any more questions before we wrap this up? No more hands? Well, why don't we give a round of applause to Tracye for a wonderful presentation.